a Sapphire Running Zone podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Tim from the Sapphire Running Zone, and this is another in our training and fundraising support podcast. And today I am joined by Andrew Ogierman from the Aspire charity, and we are going to be looking at setting goals. Now, Andrew not only works in the fundraising sector, so he looks after all the fundraising events for Aspire, including his London Marathon team, but he also is a fairly prolific runner. So he has run 100 half marathons. So setting goals is obviously something that's particularly important to Andrew. And what we're going to look at over 2 episodes, so this is episode 1, we're going to look at the importance of setting goals and how you set them. So we're going to base this on the SMART approach to setting goals. So 2 ways of looking at that. One, this is pretty smart, but the second is that for those that don't know, it's the acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. And this was developed by a gentleman called George T. Duran in 1981. And just reading a bit off Google, it's a SMART framework provides a systematic guide for setting goals that are clear, focused, and practical, helping to ensure that they are attainable and well-defined. Now, for a lot of us, setting goals in running can quite often just be limited to that very first goal. So whether it be running a half marathon, a 5K, losing weight, a specific amount of weight, doing your first marathon, it's often about that. And that's very clear. That is your goal. But it's what comes next, which is particularly important because a lot of people just do not have subsequent goals or targets. And it is really important to have a series of these over time. And it might be, if you're focusing on weight loss, it might be an amount of weight that you're targeting over a certain time frame. It might be that you do want to run a marathon, but actually you want to do a 5K, a 10K, a half. Before that, it's about which ones do you do? When do you do them? And in this first episode, Andrew and I are going to chat through his running background and how he set goals to get to that 100. It was a bit random at times, but as time went on, it was very clear that this approach to these SMART goals was really, really important. And then in the second episode, we're going to look at how he is setting goals post the 100, because obviously the more and more you do, sometimes it can be quite hard to keep that motivation going, and getting goals set is especially important for that motivation. So welcome, Andrew, and just talk us through the background to this, when you did your first run and where it all went from there.
Okay, so my first half marathon was the Great North Run in, I'm going to say October 2001. I think they were a little later in the year at the time. It was certainly the end of September, rather than as it is this year, this coming weekend. So the first one was way back then, what's that, 24 years ago. And I think, like a lot of people, when I crossed the finish line at South Shields, that was kind of it. I'd done my half marathon. I was utterly incomprehensible as to how people could run a marathon, because that was twice as far as I had just lumbered my way from Newcastle. And that was kind of it. And then in the post came would you like to sign up for next year? And note there, I said in the post, because that is how they did used to recruit, even as recently as 24 years ago. And I signed up. So that became half marathon number 2 a year later. And I think it was not until the 3rd year that I thought, well, blimey, there's other half marathons out there. And please don't ask me what the first one I did other than a Great North Run was. Stab in the dark, maybe Reading, which is a local one to me, but I'd need to look it up to be certain. And then over the course of the years, I experimented with other half marathons around the country, around the world. And I suppose at some point beyond 60 or 70 halves, there became a bit of a looming goal of 3 figures as far as getting to that 100th was concerned. But sort of if not an evolution by accident, I think evolution by design might be too strong a way of putting it as well. Somewhere between accident and design.
Great stuff. So we did a separate podcast with Andrew on our Runner Stories channel when he had done 99 and was about to run his 100. So have a listen to that one, and there's lots of detail. So just quickly tell us about that 100th event at London Landmarks back in April, Andrew, and then we'll talk specifically about goal setting.
Yeah, so it was, I mean, for me, obviously a memorable day. It's not every day of the week you get to 100 halves. Although you then see people at these events who've done 100 marathons. I don't know whether to kick them in the shins or shake them by the hand, quite frankly, because I think 100 halves is more than an achievement, but obviously it's quite literally half the achievement of 100 marathons. I know a lot of people love the Landmarks half. It gets huge rave reviews. I have to say it didn't truly work for me personally, and I stress me personally. I'm not going to go into any great detail as to why it wasn't ideal for me. A couple of little things. I felt the loos were a long way from the start. And obviously, by the time you've then walked half, 3/4 of a mile to the start and the associated time, the next thing you want to do is go to the loo. So it was little things like that, logistics on the day. And I personally found the course winding its way around London and then winding round the same bits and then winding round the bits you've done before, it drove me potty. It really did. Clearly, I'm more designed for more linear courses. I want to start somewhere and end up somewhere, not go round and round in ever decreasing circles. Whereas others I've heard, that's what they absolutely love about it, because their supporters can see them in 4 or 5 locations and they've only got to walk about 500 meters to do so. So it didn't really work for me, and something you may be aware of for very, very valid reasons and an emergency on the day, they did have to shorten the course, which was kind of kept a little under wraps. I've met people who've also done that event who were aware of it. I think it's safe to say there's probably quite a few people who are not aware that they ran a slightly short half marathon. Now, that begs the question, have I done 100 halves? For me, yes. And that's not just the walk to the start from the toilets or the walk back to get my kit, etc., etc. I completed the course that was laid out on the day. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, I did complete a 100th half marathon and there was nothing I could do otherwise. But I guess it does lead on to the fact that does there need to now be 101st just so I can formally tick the box? One thing I have to say from a positive point of view, because as I say, I know literally thousands of people love the event. For me, the highlight of the day was as I crossed the finish line, there was a row of people giving medals out. Some of them were pearly kings and queens. Obviously, there's a great London theme to the event. And they had a couple of Chelsea pensioners. And I made a point of going to one of the Chelsea pensioners. And as he handed over my medal, he kind of said, have you done this before? And I kind of said, yeah, 1 or 2. And it turned out he'd also run a fair few marathons. And we had quite a little chat for a couple of minutes. And that, apart from the respect I think we all have for Chelsea pensioners and the service they've given, for me, it made the day very special.
I can imagine. So let's talk about the setting of goals then, because obviously so many people do a running event, thinking specifically here of the London Marathon, where people get themselves trained up from nothing, spend 6 months getting to a point where they're able to run a marathon. They have the day of their lives, and then nothing. And you talk to them quite a few months later, and they've not run again or barely run again, and they've got no running goal in mind. And obviously setting a goal ahead of a race for your next race is really, really important. Just talk us through using the sort of smart approach to setting goals of, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. How did you plan your events? Using those criteria, and obviously you've had some health challenges, and so therefore have to be quite focused when it comes to selecting events. Was it a fairly random approach to these events, or did you start to use more specific criteria as you went on?
I think in terms of events, and there's almost a division, because the health problems kicked in around, I'm going to say serious health problems, probably around sort of the 80th half marathon. So I already had quite a few under my belt by then. And then certainly setting the goals as to where I was going had to change. Perhaps I'll come back onto that. When I say serious health problems, at 50 halves, I did also have a heart attack and a triple bypass. I stressed the heart attack wasn't during one of the events before people truly panic. But between about 50 and 80, I had fully recovered from the heart attack and the surgery went well. So I was able to adopt the same goal setting as I had for the first 50. And I guess there was a combination of two factors really that I would look at. One was whether or not I'd enjoyed an event in the first place. So maybe a few event organizers could take that on board. You know, if you do put out a good event, people will come back year on year because it forms part of their diary. There is that regularity. You know, it's early March, therefore it must be the Reading Half Marathon. It's late autumn, therefore it must be the Great North Run. So there are a number of events I have done a number of times. I think my most run race is the Reading Half. I think I've done 9 of them. And then it drops down from there. Another local one to me is Wokingham, which I did 6 or 7 times. So enjoyment and to a certain extent proximity. Clearly, if you're traveling 10 miles down the road, it's easier than if you're traveling 300 or 400 every time. And that's not looking even at sort of climate influence in this day and age. And should we really be flying all over the world to do races? I would say probably balance of probability, yes, because travel is always a good thing. But also, for me, beyond the enjoyment factor, I did use it as a travel incentive. So of my 100, and again, forgive the off the top of the head number because I don't know that this is 100% accurate, I would say probably about 30 of them have been overseas because it was a good opportunity to go away for the weekend, see a city, visit a country, and then also just skip your way around a half marathon. I was never really able to do it with marathons. I always found marathons a bit too challenging. So my list of is very much halves. Of my 14 or 15 marathons, over half of them are in London because I didn't have to then worry about getting home and everything afterwards. So the travel experience for me was always very important as well. Probably say at maybe 15 of them I've raised funds. So clearly if you're running 7, 8 half marathons a year, you can't be going to sponsors every time saying, oh, I'm off to do a half marathon, will you sponsor me? So I had to be a little bit selective how many times I did ask for sponsorship. Must admit, mainly that was around marathons rather than half marathons.
And did you pick a marathon specifically or a half marathon specifically because you thought it might resonate more with potential donors, or did you not? Was it more about you than the race?
That was all about me, I'm afraid. Had I enjoyed it before? Would I enjoy it again? Was it a city I hadn't been to? To kind of jump to the marathons as well. I guess for me, there was always security in numbers. We all have that fear about being chased by a bus who wants you to get on because they're about to turn the lights off sort of thing. So my marathons outside of London have been Dublin, Paris, Chicago, Tokyo, all the big, Berlin as well, all the bigger ones. And at a time, certainly with Berlin and Chicago, and this is probably going to horrify some people, you just paid to enter. There was no ballot.
Yeah.
You just entered on the day they opened entries because it was possible to get into events. Both of my Dublins as well, I just paid to enter. There was no ballot. There was no hanging on. Tokyo overseas was the one exception to that, in that it was a ballot and I was lucky enough to get a place.
It's hard to imagine, I think. It's hard to imagine now having that conversation with people, isn't it, about, the lack of ballots 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, I entered a marathon in Sofia in Bulgaria, which is in October. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do it now, but it was £30 and it was just, there you go, just enter online, piece of cake. A couple of months ago, this was cheap, easy to get in, beautiful city. I'm sure it'll be a great race. But as soon as a race gets into something like the World Marathon Majors and everyone wants to do it, then it's a whole different world, isn't it? And I think, the difficulty getting into these races is so significant now that, you have to do it really on a fundraising entry. And that isn't a given either, of course, because there's so many people want to do those.
And even if you do get in through ballots and things, the cost of races has gone up quite considerably.
Well, it has. I mean, some of the US races are hundreds of dollars now to enter, and it is very different than it used to be.
Yeah.
When you pick a race to fundraise for, do you think that the donor is more likely to sponsor you if it's a big high profile race than if it's a small one? So, if I go to someone and say, right, I'm running Sofia in October, am I likely to get more fundraising support than if I say, I'm doing Berlin, one of the World Marathon Majors, at the end of September?
In my opinion, no. You will find yourself working far, far harder. And something I say to our runners when they are asking about London Marathon places, because our minimum ask is currently £2,000 for a place. And that's a lot of money. I'm not going to, deny that or say, oh yeah, small change, you'll get there really easily. For most people, a target of 2,000 is quite a lot. But something I say to them is the moment you go to your friends and say, I'm running London, because as an event, it is so in the public consciousness, kind of people are used to being asked for sponsorship by other people for the London Marathon, but it is now a national event. It's up there in the spring with the Grand National, with the FA Cup semi-finals. For that Sunday in London, you are part of a massive international sporting event. It becomes a lot easier to fundraise. Your friends will be more generous. Ironically, we've over the years had one or two people also run the Paris Marathon, which is a week or 2 weeks before London in most years. And I know people there, they've gone to their friends and said, I'm doing the Paris Marathon. And their friends have said, oh, how far's the Paris Marathon? That there is literally that gulf in recognition, because everyone knows how far London is, but they don't necessarily associate the word marathon with it being, they kind of guess it's a long way, but they don't know that it's the 26.2 miles. So I think it is much easier to raise for headline events than it is for smaller events, even though you're running, just the same. That said, to the right fundraiser, obviously, if they are particularly committed to a cause and they start organising quizzes and barbecues and other events, then the sponsorship comes in, it's a different source. But the straight, I'm doing this, will you sponsor me? Yeah, every time do a big event, don't do a little local one.
Yeah. So when you were goal setting and you were looking at, right, well, I want to fundraise at a certain number of these events, did you sort of group them together, or did you say, right, this is what I'm doing, and it was a high profile event? Or did you just say, right, in terms of my goal setting, 2015 is my year of fundraising and I'm going to join this group of events together and I just want to get sponsorship across all of them?
It's an interesting question, because the answer is kind of yes across the board, but for different reasons and at different times. Because you think, my first half being 24 years ago, things have evolved. So if I look back, that first one, the first Great North Run, it seemed a done thing. I wasn't particularly au fait with the running world. Therefore, it seemed that if you did a half marathon, you raised funds. There wasn't a concept that you would run a race, get to the finish line and go home. So the first 2, maybe 3 Great North Runs, yes, I did fundraise at, because that seemed the way to do it. They were my places though, so they weren't obtained through a charity. They were simply obtained because after each year, Great North Run would email me, write to me, whatever it was, and say, would you like to do next year's sign up by? So I was running using my own places, hence I didn't have any obligatory commitment. The first time I did take on a minimum fundraising was in 2004 at the London Marathon. And I guess after 3 years of Great North Runs, the curiosity of, well, perhaps I could go twice as far if I put my mind to it, had grown. But even by then, getting a London Marathon place through the then much smaller ballot was still very, very difficult. So I took a charity place in 2004. I'm going to say I pledged to raise about 1,100, whatever it was at the time. And I then, of course, having said that, I so loved the 2004 experience that in 2005, I also took another charity place, but for a different charity. So the first one was for a charity I then worked for, which was a motor trade benevolent fund. I was still there the following year, but I felt I can't really take another place because that'd be 2 years running and we've only got 5. So I thought, where can I have some sort of empathy with? And I ran for the RNIB because I felt that sight loss would be so devastating to me, who've grown up with sight. To then suddenly you lose your sight in your late 30s would be just horrific. So I ran for them. The target was a little bit higher, but I was able to hit it. I exceeded by less than I had the previous year, if you're still with me on the maths. So target was higher, I reached it, but I didn't go as far beyond as I had the previous year. So there is that potential diminishing returns if you do keep running again and again and again. I also, in that instance, felt I got slightly less sponsorship from work because I was, in effect, running for a charity that wasn't the one I worked for. And I think that was noticeable. So I do think it's important when people are selecting a cause they run for, they do select one where people can see an affinity rather than just, oh, you just want the place in the event and me to sponsor you, don't you? So I do think picking a cause, people can see why you're running and will consequently be more generous. I then took 2006 off because it was pretty obvious that you can't keep going back to the same well again and again. I don't recall 2007. But I did do the London Marathon in 2007. One that then sticks in my mind because sadly my mum passed away in 2007 is in 2008, I did exactly what you suggested. I put together a collection of races. And again, it is very much how you bill or how you sell your sponsorship events, because what I did, I titled it Marathon Month. So bearing in mind at this point, I've already run 3 or 4 marathons. All I was putting out there was I'm going to cover the distance of a marathon in a month. And that was made up of definitely the Plymouth Half Marathon. I think there were a couple of club 5Ks that were around at the time. So that's the running club I belong to. And it culminated in what is now the Bupa 10,000. I think it was called the Bupa 10,000 at the time. In fact, that might not be what it's called now, the 10K event that was put on. So I did, so that again, they were all my own places, but it was marathon month and I was fundraising for the hospice who had looked after my mum in her last days. And again, partly because they could say, oh, he's running for, in memory of his mum, hospice. People got behind the fact that I was doing in the local paper. I was in the local paper, when in actual fact, I was only doing 42K over a month, which wasn't that hard, to be brutally honest. But because I'd sold what I was doing in the right way, and there was an obvious cause motivation, people were very generous.
Brilliant. That was fantastic, Andrew. Thanks for that. Really useful look at how you've integrated the setting of goals into not only your running, but also into your fundraising, which is particularly important. And in the next episode, when we come back, we will look at the next stage in your goal setting. Again, another look at the fundraising, but a real focus on knowing that you're going to have a certain time frame where you're not going to be able to do much running, and how you then set goals and keep your motivation going. So thank you for that, and we'll catch up with you again on episode 2.
Thanks for listening to this Sapphire Running Zone podcast. Keep checking back as we have lots more podcasts coming soon.